Hare Krishna. Welcome to the Bliss Podcast. One day I've really got to figure out how to put the intro music onto my computer and not have to record it off of my phone, because I know the quality is not so first class. So anyway, thank you for tolerating. And welcome one, welcome all to the Bliss Podcast. Those few rare souls who are actually tuning in. You know, you can also help the podcast out if you share it. If you like the podcast, of course, you don't have to share it. And even if you don't like the podcast, maybe you can share it with someone else. You know, if you don't like someone, then you can share it with them. And maybe, you know, if you're really an inimical person, you have a desire to disturb someone's mind, then you can do that by sharing the podcast. Actually, hopefully it won't disturb their mind. It will give them some benefit. So thank you for joining this time where we discuss various topics from a Krishna conscious point of view, from a spiritual point of view. And today we're going to talk about... what is that on my computer? What is that up there? We're going to talk about distractions. This is a very relevant subject matter because everyone is, especially nowadays, completely distracted from even... I'm not talking about spiritual things here. Of course, I can immediately go into people don't know what is the goal of life and how to make a perfection of their life and so on and so forth. But actually, even in material endeavors, even if people are trying, or lack thereof, if they're not trying to do something, it's because they're distracted. People are not... generally, there's very few people who achieve great things, even in the material world. Let's take, for example, this Elon Musk. Okay, so if you're a scientific person, you probably think Elon Musk is a top-notch personality. He's, so-called trying to fly to Mars. That is not possible. But that's another podcast. Maybe I'll cover that in another podcast. Anyway, he's trying to do so many things, and he's been quite successful. He made these electric cars or whatever, huge businesses, many inventions, very rich, wealthy personality, very influential. So I was hearing the other day that he is like a workaholic, and he even sleeps under his desk and stuff like that. You know, he doesn't stop working constantly in materialistic samadhi. He doesn't. He is totally focused on what he's doing, and therefore he can get things done. You need some determination to get things done, even materially speaking. So there are very few people nowadays who can actually achieve this kind of thing. Right? I mean, how many people are like Elon Musk? Very few. And if you just look around you, if you go on the street and you look around, one of the first things you'll notice is people are on their phones like anything. They cannot get off the phones. They're completely glued to the phone, as they say. The mind is attached to the phone. The phone is an extension of the personality. They can't be separated from the phone. Everyone's on the phone, or someone, or some other distraction. Very few people are having face-to-face conversations, or looking around at the world around them, or thinking. They're simply distracting themselves. I had a podcast also called Boredom, which is quite similar to this topic, a little different. But in that video, I mentioned that there's a study done by there's some scientific guy on YouTube or whatever, and he did a study about if people ever have the time to just be with their mind, if they have time to just be quiet and think, allow themselves to think. And he did kind of a survey around a college campus. And he did a survey, and there was also a survey done by some other scientists or whatever. So the result of those surveys was that actually very, very few people, let's say 14% or something like that, you can go and check. The video is actually there in the podcast. A very small amount of the people who from who were surveyed would allow themselves just to think. Most of them would pull out the phones and distract themselves. They're very uncomfortable with the thought of thinking. The thought of thinking. They can't allow themselves to do it because the mind is filled up with rubbish, actually, and has a very short attention span, and they have to start asking important questions in life, which, if they answer them, then they can't really, enjoy materially as much as they like to. Like, why? What is the purpose of my life? What am I doing here? Who am I? These kind of important questions. So we're distracting ourselves. Now, if you've ever tried to meditate, first of all, I recommend it, of course. Not just any meditation, not chanting Om and putting your hands in a weird mudra, and putting them on your knees and trying to silence your mind. That is not possible. But instead, a very easy process of meditation that everyone should know about, but very few people do know about, unfortunately. That is my mistake, I guess. But chanting Hare Krishna. So this is a very, very easy method of meditation, which grips the mind by chanting, by vibration. Loud vibration. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So you just chant these 16 words, and this vibration, it stops the mind from going back and forth and to this thing and to that thing, and actually just desiring distraction. There's a great devotee, a great practitioner of this particular type of meditation called Vishnu Jan Maharaj, and he says that the chanting, it actually pierces the unwillingness to meditate or to concentrate. So very interesting. We have an unwillingness to concentrate our mind. If you concentrate your mind on something material, why we have an unwillingness to concentrate our mind is because everything in the material world that's in our immediate sense vicinity is limited and temporary. So we have concentrated our mind. We've tried to concentrate our mind on material things: money, woman, power, influence, fame, materialistic concepts. We try to focus our mind, and because these things are all fallible, we become frustrated in trying to do that. No one has ever become satisfied or happy by meditating on that which is temporary. It's not possible. You're filled up with anxiety because you're accepting something which ultimately will not be, or in Sanskrit it's called asat. So we have an unwillingness to concentrate the mind because, in our experience, there's no point in one sense of concentrating the mind. It's all frustrating. So we would just rather distract ourselves with the iPhone, the Facebook, the TV, the intoxication, the food, the sex. There's so many things, just because these things just keep us in like a constant flow. The mind is no longer, it doesn't have to meditate on something which is quite unpalatable. The fact that actually I don't find enjoyment in this world, and eventually I'll have to die, and I don't really know what I'm doing here. These are daunting concepts, so we'd rather distract our mind. But meditation it pierces that unwillingness, and unlike what meditation is usually advertised of nowadays, meditation is advertised nowadays as a way to improve your material circumstance. But that is not the purpose of meditation. It's not simply that I make my life just a little bit better. I feel a little bit more confident, or I overcome some difficulty, or I feel less stressed. This is a very minor side effect of real meditation. But actually the goal of meditation is to transcend the mind, transcend the very concept of being the body. Yes, we're not the body. We're the consciousness within the body. And even beyond that, that is just actually the beginning of real meditation. But beyond even those very elevated stages of meditation, to see face to face God himself, Krishna. So that may seem very wild, but actually it is the fact that by chanting this Hare Krishna mantra, it is possible to see Krishna face to face. Okay, so we have an unwillingness to meditate, but that is because we have a bad experience of meditation or concentration. And this chanting of Hare Krishna is a very effective way to concentrate on something which is beyond this world, which we feel so inclined to distract ourselves from. And but still, even if you so let's, before we go into the chanting, before I get a little too carried away, let's go a little bit deeper into why or what is actually the nature of distraction. So the distraction can be broken down in a couple of ways. The why we get distracted, or where is the home base of distraction, is within the mind. Right, mind is kind of like the modus operandi of our existence. Mind is the primary sense. We have different senses: seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, different senses, and also minor senses also. That's not addressed in the Vedas, but anyway, these main senses are there. And the mind is the primary sense. These are where all the senses are revolving around, and how we experience these different senses also, because the mind focuses on a particular sense object. So there's a very interesting elaboration on this by, as I was mentioning before, this great devotee, Vishnujan Maharaj. I'm going to play an audio clip from Maharaj, and we're going to hear his explanation of how the senses are working.
Govinda. Hi. Govinda. Go means senses, and Vinda means one who gives pleasure. So that song was about that energy which gives pleasure to all the senses. Every living being has a set of senses and a set of sense objects. Just like right in this area right here, there's millions of living entities. There's a grass. It has its particular type of senses and sense objects. There's so many different kinds of birds. They also have their senses and sense objects. And similarly, there's human beings who have their senses and sense objects. Senses and sense objects, in fact, are something that our mind is always absorbing. Just like right now, you're allowing your mind to absorb in hearing. Sound is the sense object, and hearing is the sense perception. And you're allowing your mind to absorb in that hearing relationship. Similarly, if you like, you can allow your mind to absorb in seeing the clouds floating through the sky. And if you like, you can absorb yourself in the fact that you're sitting on the grass and you can feel the sensation of touch. In this way, the mind is the center of the senses. It's wandering around from one senses to one set of sense objects to another to another. And in yoga, the whole idea is to find a happiness which is above, which is greater than the limitation of the senses. Of course, there's happiness in seeing something pretty or hearing something nice, touching something, smelling something, tasting something. These are all sources of happiness, but the mind can never fix on any one of them for very long. For example, suppose you're tasting something very nice. That's all right for a few minutes, but then after a while your mind rejects it and wants to go on to something else. You want to talk with a friend and hear words or emotions again. Then after talking with a friend for a while, then you feel like doing something else, going to smell some nice incense or something. In this way, the mind is wandering. And in yoga, the whole idea is to find that relationship or that set of senses and sense objects, which is not so temporary, which is not so limited. And this is actually what we're developing in this meditation, in this chanting process. In India, for thousands of years, over 650 million people, even today in the villages of India, at 12 noon, they stop their work and all of them gather together.
Okay, so then Maharaj goes a bit more into the chanting process. Maybe we can come back to that. But specifically, what I wanted to touch on there is this very nice scientific breakdown of the interactions of the senses and the particular objects. So, very, very interesting, right? That you are tasting something, but it's not that you can necessarily go on tasting that thing at one time. The nature of the mind is flickering. Even when you're eating something, you probably have the experience. And I know that there are, before I was in practicing Krishna consciousness, I'm not in Krishna consciousness, but before I was practicing Krishna consciousness, I was also doing different kinds of meditation, awareness meditation, and so on and so forth. Maybe some of you have the experience. So one of the practices in these particular kinds of meditations is that you become present, whatever that really means, but you try to experience and soak your mind in a particular experience. Of course, that's entirely material. I don't recommend that you try this. I'm just for the sake of elaboration on a particular point. The practice is to soak your mind in a particular experience, and the sensations focus on that experience. Because even when you're tasting something, for example, it's a very sensual experience, but your mind is thinking about so many other things while you're doing it, or you're hearing your friends, or you're focusing on the views or whatever, or something else, or I don't know, maybe you're smelling like the burning from from somebody else cooking, whatever. The point is that the mind is not, it can't focus on that particular thing. It's chanchilla, as we say in Sanskrit. It's not steady. The mind is trying to go to many other things. It accepts the taste, and then it rejects the taste, and it goes for another thing, smell or sound or touch or whatever. And this is the constant nature of the mind. It's not just when you're eating something. It's in every single moment. Your brain, if you walk down the street and you just observe yourself. I was doing this earlier today while I was going and shopping for some foodstuffs to offer to Krishna. I was just observing my own mind, and I had the experience, or was able to observe a bit more closely, that if you just walk down the streets, the mind is very much the eyes are seeing something, and the mind is then focusing on what the eyes are seeing, and then a sound happens. The car honks its horn, and then the ears are hearing, so then the mind absorbs in the hearing sense, and then there's some awful smell. There's so many like meat shops here in London, so there's these disgusting smells of rotting meat. So then the nose is unfortunately absorbed in that particular sense experience, so then the mind absorbs in that. And the mind is basically being tossed around in a washing machine or drying machine of various sense experiences. So accepting certain experiences and then rejecting the same experiences to accept another experience. Sorry. So as Maharaj pointed out there in the audio clip, this is because as I mentioned before, the experiences in this world are temporary, and they also don't satisfy, because these sense objects are interacting with the senses themselves, not yourself. Your mind is absorbing in a particular experience, but you're not necessarily you're not the one being satisfied or touched by that experience. You are simply observing the sense interact with the sense object. Right? Because we're not the body and we're not the mind. These things are like dresses. Like a car. Maybe a car is a better example. We are driving a car, and we fill up the car, we put some gas in the car, whatever, and the car is having experiences, I guess you could say. The outside of the car is experiencing the wind and the light and the dust and whatever. But you're inside the car. So, but we're not the car itself. If we identify with the car, that is our nonsense. The car is changing. You have to replace certain parts of the car or whatever, and over time, eventually the car is unusable and you give it up. So similarly, that is like the body. Or maybe another example is a dress. The dresses, you take off different dresses and you replace them with new dresses, but you don't identify with a dress. If you throw away your shirt, it's not that you've thrown away your very self. So similarly, your body is changing, but you're still here. You're not throwing away the body. So because we're not the body, and the body means these different senses, why we have a body is so we can hear and touch and smell and taste. So because we're not the body, when these particular sense experiences are happening, we don't feel satisfied, because it's like scratching the surface or licking the outside of the bottle of honey. The sense experiences are simply happening on our shell and our outside covering, but the soul itself, it doesn't touch these material experiences. So the question then is, what is the sense experience of the soul? So the sense experience of the soul is service to Krishna, or the Supreme Spiritual Whole. Actually, all these different, we can basically understand that the basis for existence is service. Everyone is serving someone. I'm serving. I don't have a wife, but many people do, so maybe it will relate in that way. If you have a wife or a girlfriend or whatever, you're serving the girlfriend, right? And the girlfriend is serving you. And actually, on a deeper level, or let's just quickly establish this: that even if you don't have a girlfriend, you're serving your friends, or if you're a little higher, more elevated, you're serving the people, right? Serving the poor. Or if you're the president, you're serving the whole country. Even if you're the most powerful man, the president, you're still serving all the people. So service is there. But actually, if we go very deep into the subject matter, we can understand that we're not serving necessarily the people, because the people are the soul. And you're not serving the soul, you're serving the body. And why you're serving the body? Because you want to feel happy. So ultimately, actually, it's because we're serving our own senses. But service is the principle. So we are serving our senses even when we're having sense experiences. We are meditating on the senses, and we are allowing them to enjoy, right? We say, okay, yes, the tongue wants to taste, so I go to a restaurant. I enjoy nice foodstuffs. So I'm serving my tongue. So service is the principle. Now, what is the service of the soul? Because if these services are just for the body, then the soul must also have a service. And that service is to serve the senses of Krishna, or God. Okay, so this is you can take it or leave it, but this is the information we get from the Vedas. Of course, logic can only go so far. We can logically analyze, okay, I'm not the body, I'm the soul. What is the purpose of, or what is the basis of existence is service. What is the soul service? That we can't really understand necessarily very easily or get conclusive knowledge, but if we take knowledge from an authority, we can know that the object of service is Krishna. So, anyway, so now the mind is flickering between these things: form, taste, smell, touch, and sound. Why is flickering, though? Not just because it's temporary, but because it is searching for an ultimate end. Another experience I had, I was trying to observe my mind, was that the eyes, for example, are looking for something beautiful. You don't want to see something horrible unless you're, sadistic, which then that's another case. Maybe this podcast isn't for you. But generally, we're all looking for something beautiful. You see a nice sunset. Oh, very nice. You want to look at the sunset. Something very colorful. You want to look at the colorful. Everyone has the experience. The beautiful form of the opposite sex, man or woman, it doesn't matter, whatever, it depends who you are. So we're all looking for something beautiful. And the eyes are not satisfied with looking at something boring. They want to find that beautiful thing. But even when you get something beautiful, still you're not satisfied. That's why, for example, when a man and a woman, they get together, okay, the man is attracted to the woman because he thinks the woman is beautiful. Generally, that's the case. But the divorce is there. The breakup, the heartbreak is there. Because the man wants more women, or the woman wants more men. So the eyes are not satisfied by seeing. If they were satisfied by seeing the beauty, then it would just last forever. But that's not the case. The man is looking around, the woman is looking around. Similarly, with any other sense experience, you can get to the same thing. The senses are never satisfied with that particular thing. So they're looking for an ultimate reservoir, of the particular sense object. The particular, you could say, like an opulence, right? So we're looking for ultimately, you boil it down, what are all these things expressed in one word? Pleasure. Beauty is pleasure, taste is pleasure, beautiful sound is pleasure, beautiful sense of touch is pleasure, beautiful smells are pleasure, beautiful interactions, relationships, that's also pleasure. That's also, you have a sense of relationships, right? So we're looking for the ultimate reservoir of the pleasure. Now, you can understand very logically that the source of all these things must be the ultimate reservoir of all of the things: beauty, smell, taste, whatever, so on, so on, so forth. So when the senses are able to see the source of all these things, when they're able to experience the source of all these things, not just seeing everything, then the mind becomes no longer flickering. It becomes fixed up because it has nowhere else to go. If the mind has found, finally, what it's been looking for, the ultimate, the end all, the most beautiful, the most delicious, the most lovely, the best sound, then the senses finally find their rest or their home, their satisfaction. So the nature of the mind is flickering because we haven't found that reservoir of pleasure. And what is that reservoir of pleasure? It's actually not a what, it is a who. Krishna. Krishna is the source of everything. God, the source of everything, must be a person, because me and you, we're conscious beings. You're conscious because you're hearing me right now, and you're choosing to hear me, and you're meditating on what I'm saying, hopefully. And I'm a conscious being because I'm having although it may be over a platform which is not exactly direct. We are interacting, and I'm speaking, and I'm choosing to speak, whatever. So we're two conscious living entities, and we're hearing and we're speaking, and so on and so forth. We're living conscious entities. So we come from an original source, a source of all energies, and that energy source must contain everything within our experience. If it's the source of everything, it must also contain consciousness. So the source of everything is a conscious living entity. So that's Krishna. And then when we serve Krishna, all the senses become no longer distracted because they found the ultimate. Okay, so we can go a little further also. Now, why are we in this state of consciousness that we are distracted, right? I just had to check if the podcast was recording. Almost just had a heart attack. Got distracted. Okay, so why are we distracted in the first place? Now I'm distracted thinking about water. Just see how my mind is looking for these things. That's actually a point I wanted to touch on. We are distracted. See, I just paused the podcast very intelligently, I have to say myself, and took some water. And hopefully, I was thinking you wouldn't notice, but I just exposed myself anyway. So, the reason we're distracted, the reason why we're in this realm of distraction, is because we want to be Krishna. We want to be that ultimate reservoir of pleasure. That is a perverted desire of the soul, and to fulfill that desire, we have to take a material body which covers us with the illusion that we are the sense enjoyer. Right? The sense objects are interacting the senses are interacting with the sense objects, and we're in this covering. We're experiencing the body, which is interacting with the material world, but we're not the body. It's a covering. Why we have that covering? So we can experience this so-called sense enjoyment, which is not enjoyment at all, because the soul cannot enjoy like that. The soul enjoys by Krishna's enjoyment because it is part and parcel of Krishna, just like a finger enjoys when it's connected with the whole body. Okay, so now the particular energy which makes us conditioned and attached to the body is called the false ego. And the false ego is not that when I become liberated, I think that I'm free from ego. Many so-called spiritualists, they say you must be free from the ego. It's not possible to be free from the ego. Ego means identity. I'm a person now in the body. What makes the body active is the personality. If the personality is out of the body is dead, so it's a personality that makes the body active. So if the personality is so active within the body, surely after he's out of the body, he must also be active, which means identity. So there is false ego and there is also real ego. But false ego, in the sense that we're talking about it, is what attaches us to the false designations or upadhis, which mean I am a boy, I'm a girl, I'm a American, I'm a Hindu, I'm a so on and so forth. I'm the body. That's the illusion. Okay, so now when we're bewildered by this false ego, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 3rd chapter, in the 27th verse, Prakritihi kriyamanani gunai karmani savashaha. And it translates to be, the spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of false ego, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by the 3 modes of nature. So, we are conditioned to a particular mode of nature, goodness, passion, or ignorance, right? We basically, what this boils down to is that due to association with material nature, in different ways, we are attached to particular enjoyments in this world. Some people are enjoying simply like animals. That's most people. Eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, and there's nothing more than that. That is ignorance. Then there's passion, which is a little bit more, but it's almost the same thing. Passion is very much active, not so lazy as ignorance, very much active to enjoy the senses, and sometimes taking to even scripture, trying to improve his material situation through sacrifice, through scripture, elevating him to higher realms of consciousness, but only for the sake of material enjoyment. So it's like a slightly more elevated ignorance, which is not exactly very commendable. And then there's the mode of goodness, which is pensive, and that means that the sense enjoyment is restricted on a gross scale, and that frees one from karma, it purifies one's karma. But there's a more subtle conditioning where one becomes puffed up by the sense of happiness, because our senses are distracting us in so many ways. When we become pious and purified, and the senses are less distracting us, because if you just consider, someone who's very deep in the mode of ignorance, he becomes almost crazy, mad, very, very lusty, and very, very angry also because of the lust. So his mind is very much disturbed. You can see this sometimes. People are so much disturbed by their mind because they're very deep into material enjoyment. They're intoxicating, taking drugs, chasing after women, working very, very hard to get some material position and wealth. The mind is quite disturbed. They can't focus. This is because of so many unbridled desires from the ignorance and the passionate modes of nature. So, in goodness, when the passions are quieted and the ignorance is more removed, one becomes more free from these different pressures of material nature, but he becomes conditioned to the sense of happiness. This is what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita. He becomes conditioned to a sense that he is better and purer than others, and he enjoys. He still thinks that he is the enjoyer. He's not quite on the platform of pure knowledge of the soul, which is that he's not actually the enjoyer, and that is his real enjoyment. He still thinks that I am the enjoyer and my sense enjoyment is the reality. Okay, so now my point was that yes, we are distracted because we're associating with these particular modes of nature as a result of having this designation that I am the body, and that designation, it contaminates the intelligence. Okay, so the intelligence is what determines that you're going to pursue a certain thing. By my intelligence, I determine I'm going to become a big businessman, or I'm going to sleep for 17 hours a day, 26 hours a day, or I'm going to pursue spiritual life. This is the intelligence is determining. And then below the intelligence is the mind, and below the mind is the senses. Okay, so the false ego is determining the intelligence, then the intelligence is determining the mind, and the mind is controlling the senses, or being controlled by the senses, depends on the arrangement. Okay, so if the intelligence is impure because of a wrong sense of ego, a misplaced ego, then the mind is also uncontrolled because the senses are not properly engaged. if your senses are let loose, if you don't try to control your senses, if you just throw yourself into the whirlpool of material existence, which is a big ocean of various sense objects, right? If you go outside, it's just the world is it is comprised of sense objects. There's foodstuffs, there's sounds, there are things to see, there are people to meet. It is a world of sense objects. But if you don't control your senses and you just let yourself swim in this ocean, you're going to be pulled here and to and fro, as they say, by your various senses. The eyes want to go see, the ears want to hear, the mouth wants to taste, so on and so on. And so you can just imagine, the senses are pulling you in all kinds of different directions. How can you be peaceful? And then how can you be happy? It's not possible. And it's certainly not possible to become determined in any kind of pursuit, especially one to get out of the material world, which is the source of all of our suffering. So one has to control the senses. It's not that you can perform yoga or meditation and do all kinds of nonsense, enjoy more than ever, simply because you're pursuing some meditation. No. You must control your senses. You must live a lifestyle. Now, and when you do that, then the mind becomes controlled automatically, right? Because if the senses are controlled, if the senses are one-pointed, focused on one point, then the mind also becomes focused on one point, like we were talking about before. The mind is focusing on a particular sense engagement. So if the sense engagement is on one point, the mind also becomes focused. And then when the mind becomes focused, the intelligence becomes steady. And when the intelligence becomes steady, then the false ego becomes more purified. And as the false ego becomes purified, then the soul becomes liberated from the conception that he is the body. Okay, so this is the process of liberation from the material entanglement. And then from that point on, you can move on to higher stages. But that's not that's not where we're going with this particular podcast. Now, you can also look at it from the other way. Now, there's no impetus to control the senses if you don't understand why the false ego is false, because that's the beginning domino. But if you don't push the beginning domino, then the other dominoes will not collapse. So, we should work. We should understand the actual position. What is our actual position? And that is only possible because we're in this ocean of material sense enjoyment and material interactions and reactions. It's not possible to have any firm or fixed knowledge, a transcendental knowledge beyond the material world. It's not possible. Our intelligence is covered. It's in the material entanglement. That's why it's called an entanglement. We are bound up. So how can, if you're bound up, can you unbind yourself? It's not possible. Therefore, you must accept a guru. A guru is one who can give you transcendental knowledge from beyond this world, knowledge of the self and of the self's relationship with God, and knowledge of God. And by hearing from a guru, the transcendental knowledge, you reawaken your original consciousness, your pure consciousness, and you purify that association with false ego, and thereby you purify your intelligence. Thereby you can control your senses. So hearing from a guru is most important. Then this is the beginning of spiritual life. So there's a very interesting shloka in the Bhagavad Gita which explains this concept, and Srila Prabhupada in his purport also, of course, enlightens us about the actual meaning of the shloka, the import. So in the 18th chapter and 58th shloka, verse of the Bhagavad Gita, you will find this shloka. Krishna says, if you become conscious of me, Krishna, you will pass over all the obstacles of conditioned life by my grace. If, however, you do not work in such consciousness, but act through false ego, not hearing me, you will be lost. Very interesting. So Prabhupada says in the purport, a person in full Krishna consciousness is not unduly anxious about executing the duties of his existence. The foolish cannot understand this great freedom from all anxiety. For one who acts in Krishna consciousness, Lord Krishna becomes the most intimate friend. He always looks after his friend's comfort, and he gives himself to his friend, who is so devotedly engaging, working 24 hours a day to please the Lord. Therefore, no one should be carried away by the false ego of the bodily concept of life. One should not falsely think himself independent of the laws of material nature or free to act. He is already under strict material laws, but as soon as he acts in Krishna consciousness, he is liberated, free from all the material perplexities. One should note very carefully that one who is not active in Krishna consciousness is losing himself in the material whirlpool, in the ocean of birth and death. No conditioned soul actually knows what is to be done and what is not to be done, but a person who acts in Krishna consciousness is free to act because everything is prompted by Krishna from within and confirmed by the spiritual master. Okay, so it's not exactly so related. I could have maybe picked a better quote for the hearing, but the shloka does say, "Not hearing me, you'll be lost." So ultimately, the guru, as is confirmed in the last line, everything is prompted by Krishna from within and confirmed by the spiritual master. So Krishna is giving the knowledge in the Bhagavad Gita of how to practice yoga, how to be free from distraction, how to focus the mind on the ultimate, on Krishna, and become free from our entanglement in the material world. And the guru, he is the via medium by which this knowledge is translated into an understandable format for us in our current age, because we're not able to approach directly the knowledge of Krishna. We're not so intelligent. So the spiritual master, he comes and he passes down the knowledge in a way that is approachable by us. And he's also the external manifestation of the super soul, who is Krishna also, and inspiring us to get out of this world of distraction, world of birth and death, as Srila Prabhupada says. And the spiritual master is the external manifestation. So he is confirming how to serve, how to perform devotional service, how to control the senses. So it's necessary to hear from the guru about this knowledge, and then one becomes fixed in the real concept of life, not the bodily concept of life. When you hear from Srila Prabhupada about Krishna, when you hear the transcendental pastimes of Krishna, when you hear about the temporary nature of this world from a perfect authority, automatically, because it is from a perfect authority, that's the main principle, but automatically the intelligence becomes purified. Even if you don't even realize it, it's a transcendental effect, but it is subtly clearing out all the attachments, all the misconceptions that we have about this world and about ourselves. And then, as you clear your intelligence by hearing, then you can engage more firmly, with more determination, with less distraction, in the process of reconnecting with Krishna, reconnecting your senses into the supreme sense engagement devotional service. So, yes, just one more point I wanted to bring up in this purport. Where is that? Yeah, so yes, now the one point, as I was mentioning before, the one point that frees us from the distractions that we have, the things that entangle us deeper into the whirlpool of material existence, right? We are distracted by so many unlimited desires to enjoy in various ways. And when the senses are controlled, these distractions become more and more minimized. So the real sense engagement, as I mentioned before, is devotional service. And this can be done in multiple ways. And the first and foremost is by jiva dao, or that's in Sanskrit, that means by the process of the tongue. So it seems a little strange. I can control my senses by the tongue? Yes, that is actually the fact. This chanting of Hare Krishna begins from the tongue, and just eating Krishna prasadam. Krishna prasadam is a food that's offered to Krishna, because the tongue has two primary purposes. Vibrating and tasting. You want to speak something, and you also want to taste something. So in the Vedas, we just accept Vedic information. The tongue is the most voracious sense. The tongue always wants to be speaking and always wants to be tasting. You can think about it like this also. You can go without seeing for a little while. You can be in your room seeing the same thing over and over again. You can go without hearing. People don't necessarily always have to be hearing some nice music or whatever. But can you go without speaking to anyone? Or can you go at all without eating? It is very, very, very difficult. That is very austere. So the tongue is the most voracious, and if we control the tongue, automatically the other senses become controlled. So this is a transcendental point. Maybe it is beyond our comprehension, but that is what is prescribed in the Vedic literature. And it can be practically felt also. If one chants Hare Krishna and just tastes Krishna Prasadam, he will feel that the mind becomes less and less distracted, becomes focused on Krishna. And there are other sensory engagements also. The eyes should be engaged in seeing the beautiful form of Krishna. Instead of seeing so many nonsense things, they see the ultimate beautiful form of Krishna in his deity. The ear should be engaged in hearing the wonderful glorification of Krishna, his incredible transcendental pastimes with his friends and with his associates and with his paraphernalia. These beautiful, incredible pastimes, like he's killing so many demons in wonderful ways, and performing wondrous acts like lifting Govardhana Hill. These are very satisfying to the ear, so we won't want to hear the glorification of very insignificant personalities in this material world. We all want to read some newspaper or read some novel or whatever. So the ear is demanding these certain engagements, but if we hear about Krishna's pastimes, then the ear will be satisfied. And in this way, every single sense can be engaged in Krishna consciousness instead of material consciousness. And then the mind becomes free from the desire to be distracted. It finds the ultimate satisfaction of the soul in Krishna consciousness. And then you no longer have a desire to be distracted. And at a certain point, after freeing oneself from the distraction for the senses, one becomes aware more and more of his position as a soul, a spirit soul. And he realizes in various stages the different aspects of the soul. The soul, just like Krishna, God, is Satchidananda Vigraha, which means, in English, he is eternal, he's blissful, and he is full of knowledge. So, this is the nature of God. He doesn't die, he has no ignorance, and he's always happy. And similarly, because we're part and parcel of Krishna, we're also spiritual entities, not in the same quantity, but in quality. We are also eternal, blissful, and full of knowledge. So, at a certain stage, you begin to realize at different increments, this nature, and one of the first realizations is one's eternality. So, another reason we're distracted is because we're constantly in anxiety. Oh, I have to eat now. I have to go and get my foodstuffs. I have to protect my body, because we think we're the body. So I have to protect my body by eating, by sleeping, by mating, by defending. And we're also in anxiety because the body is temporary. Eventually everything will be gone. The whole body will leave. Sorry to bring it to such a stark point, but that is the fact. Everything will be gone. And because we are aware of this, although we might not always want to talk about it, we are aware of it. Therefore, we're always in anxiety and we are distracted. I was just on the streets. I'm saying everything from the street because I was meditating on how to do this podcast before I came to do it. So when I was on the street, I noticed that people are, and myself also, when something happens, for example, a car comes up beside, or someone walks a little closely behind you, you're in anxiety, you're looking behind you, and people are doing this all the time, looking, or what's he doing? They're in anxiety if someone's going to compromise their safety, their material body. people are in anxiety for so many things, or they're at the ATM, right? They're protecting their money and they're covering the PIN code, and they become very much in anxiety if you come and look at this stuff. Why? Because you need money so that you can feed yourself, so that you can continue living in this material body. But if you realize that you're eternal, then you become free from all these distractions. Actually, you become liberated. And that's why a devotee is already liberated in this life. He's engaging his senses in the eternal occupation, and he's liberated from these various anxieties. He becomes abhay, or charanara sorry. Our spiritual master's name, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. A.C. means Abhay Charanara Vindam. So Charanara Vindam means fearless, because he has taken shelter of the lotus feet of Krishna. Vindam means the lotus feet of Krishna, sorry. Well, I'm not so expert at the Sanskrit, but anyway, fearlessness. One becomes fearless because he realizes, I'm not this body, so I'm not going to die. And I don't have to worry about these bodily necessities. Krishna will provide. So one becomes automatically free from distractions. And this is the liberation of the soul. So it's very much easy to become liberated, and not just liberated, much beyond liberation. That is not the goal of Krishna consciousness, is to become liberated, but to engage in the service. But liberation is an automatic byproduct, as we have explained here on this podcast. So what are you waiting for? Don't get distracted. So many times we are missing the opportunity to hear from a pure devotee. Srila Prabhupada is a pure devotee from the spiritual world. He has given all of the knowledge of self-realization of Krishna. He has given everything. Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, Bhagavad Gita. Volumes and volumes and volumes of hearing, things to satisfy your hearing. Not just for sense engagements, but that is one thing, but you'll never get bored by reading Srimad Bhagavatam or Chaitanya Charitamrita or Bhagavad Gita. These pastimes are so incredible. So much rich philosophy is there. And just by hearing, you can purify your intelligence and get out of this constantly dissatisfying atmosphere, which is distraction, sense distraction. And so many times we neglect this hearing, even though it is right there in front of us. We should not waste time. We should not get distracted with insignificant things that will never make us happy. We should hear from a pure devotee and take up to this practice of Krishna consciousness, chant Hare Krishna. Save time. Make your life simple. You don't have to work hard. You don't have to over-endeavor for things that are not necessarily beneficial for your spiritual life. If it is not necessary or beneficial for your Krishna consciousness, for your spiritual life, reject it. Save time for chanting Hare Krishna. Don't sleep 11 hours like an elephant, or whatever they say, like a hog. Don't eat necessarily so many times a day, or rajasic foodstuffs or tamasic foodstuffs. Of course, offer all your food to Krishna. You don't necessarily have to, certainly you don't have to talk about nonsense with people, or hear nonsense literature, or watch nonsense stuff on the television, or so many things. And especially engaging in nonsense relationships that have nothing to do with Krishna. So in this way you save so much time for the stuff that actually matters, which is hearing and chanting the glories of Krishna. And in this way, you won't have to distract yourself with all these things, because the mind will become pacified, fixed up, and ultimately find rest at the lotus feet of Krishna. So it's getting very late here in London, and that while more things could be said on the topic of distraction, I think I've said kind of enough at this point. So if you didn't get distracted while you were listening to this podcast and me rambling on, please put a like on the podcast. Please share it with your friends. And please tell me what you thought about the podcast in the comment section below, so I can get some feedback. I feel sometimes like I'm just talking to a wall. which I literally am. Yeah, I'm literally talking to a wall. But it would be nice if I could hear, because I know that people are listening to the podcast, and if people could give me a little something, a little feedback, so I can improve or stop talking about some point or stop some habit, that would be nice. Um, so it'll be nice also to connect with all the nice people who are listening. And anyway, so there are many other things that you can hear. If this was not satisfactory to you, if you still feel that you need to distract yourself, you can go on this channel and check out our other podcasts. You can go on our Expand the Bliss live stream page, check out his Grace Spiritual Peru's Srimad Bhagavatam classes every single morning. They're extremely nutritious for your spiritual life. His Grace gives very nice classes. People are appreciating 30 people daily or so, not 30, maybe 25 or 20. People are hearing these classes and becoming less and less distracted. And you can go also and check out our Facebook page. And you can also give us some support. We can make more podcasts. We can do more things that will hopefully embellish your Krishna consciousness. If you give us a little donation, we have a Just Giving page. We have a Patreon. We have PayPal. Many different facilities, different ways by which you can support us. Take your pick. Or you can buy some of our ebooks. His Grace Spiritual Prabhu has compiled very nice ebooks on the philosophy of Krishna consciousness to distract your various philosophical senses. So please go and check those out and download them and purchase them if you feel so much inclined. Alright, so thank you for tuning in, all you beautiful souls. And don't get distracted. Save time. Chant Hare Krishna. Jai Srila Prabhupada.